You're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Today we're talking about coaching, about finding our true path, about finding purpose, direction, understanding in life. And so when I was thinking of who to include on the show, Lori Dixon came to mind. Lori is a coach. She has a therapeutic background. She has a book out called Step Out, Step Up, and Step Forward, How to Walk in Purpose in Your Life. And many of you have probably also seen her on the Real Housewives of Dallas. Lori, it's great to have you in the studio today.
Thank you, Ashley. It's awesome to be here.
So, Lori, tell me a little bit about how you got into coaching to begin with.
I think I started super early in life. I think I was coaching all the neighborhood kids. But I've always been there to be helpful with people. And I think I just carried that through in a lot of my background in education and leadership and eventually kind of speaking, things like that, and decided to predominantly work with that therapy side of getting people over some of the challenges and hurdles and help them get out of their own way and kind of build them up so that they were ready to shift perspective.
I love that word perspective. That's a big deal here on the show. Let me ask you, Lori, when you're dealing with most of your clients, when they first come in to work with you, what's the biggest setback or the biggest personal thing that they're actually holding on to that's holding them back in life?
Easy to answer. Themselves. And when we find out who they truly are, one of the first exercises I do with people is having them write I am and filling in the blank at least 50 times. And what starts to happen is they realize that they don't even believe the words they're saying half the time, that they're using it from what somebody else says about them, or that if we go to the negative side and I say I am not, that's real easy to fill in because it's the lies that we always tell ourselves or the lies somebody told us. And so we start realizing who we really are in the middle of it. So it's teaching them how to get out of their own way and giving them the ability to see forwards further down the path.
I agree with you. I think that oftentimes people walk in and their issue is obviously created in self. But I think a lot of times when we were kids, we got delivered a bill of goods that we seem to stick with for most of our life. And I think that a lot of people don't know how to let that go.
You got it. I call them heartstrings. And what I work predominantly with when we get to that point is taking a look at the anchors that have really been deeply embedded in our ocean floor. And we take a look at all the barnacles that have actually grown up the chain of all the things that have happened to us in our life, including environmental and friendships and relationships and even work experiences that have proven the negative. And so when something happens in our life, as you're suggesting, we ping that. And then what occurs is it pulls on that anchor and all that negativity and all that memory comes flowing back out.
I agree with you. I think it's interesting, though, when you're thinking about what goes through someone's mind on a given second of a given day, and I bet you see this often with your clients, there's way more negative thought than the positive.
You got it. It's 5 times more powerful. And actually, research shows us through most of the studies that 7 times more than that one positive, we think of 7 times more negative. And usually we go to the negative thought. There's a great researcher, Barbara Friedman, and her work, one of my favorite articles of hers is Bad is Stronger Than Good. And she has done multiple research studies in that whole area of seeing how deeply rooted negative is. Negative starts at 2 years old with one word.
I agree with that. It's interesting. That's one thing I would never let my kids watch is TV before a certain age, because I think sometimes kids internalize things that happen on TV and think that it actually happened in reality in their home, and that negativity. I think it's interesting. Let me know what you think about this. How many people walk into your office and think that affirmations are a crock of crap?
They do in the beginning until they start seeing the power of watching them work.
How do you like it when a client says, when you bring up the fact, hey, I got a list of affirmations I want you to work on. I think it's really going to help you. And they go, oh, affirmations? I don't believe in that. What's your response to that?
I usually look at them and say, okay, which one of these do you not believe? And which one of these has somebody ever said about you? So let's start with the negative ones. And then I have them write all the I am nots. And stand there and say, oh, so what's the thing that somebody has said about you, the earliest one you remember? So if we flip that around and then show them the difference, there's usually an aha moment.
I think it's interesting, too. You can get a call from 100 people in one day that leave you a voicemail and tell you how great you are. Mm-hmm. And you get that one call.
That's right.
And that one message that one day where they literally beat you down to size. And what is the one thing that's on your mind all day? The one call.
It. That's right. And how to overcome it. Mm-hmm. And you totally believe it. And so an affirmation isn't going to work on that. And I'll tell you, giving affirmations to someone to even have them read, unless they own it, which I believe there's knowledge, there's belief, and there's practice. And without belief in the middle, knowledge does not change practice. The only thing that does is belief. So if you give them affirmations and they're sitting there reading them on their bathroom mirror, it doesn't work until they actually believe that affirmation themselves.
Well, and I think that anybody that's not able to believe that is probably not a particular good client to work with.
You got it. Those are the ones we cut loose very early on. And usually I move them on very gently. I don't say, I'm sorry, but you won't be welcome back next Tuesday.
Don't let the door hit you on the way out.
Sorry, this is not a good fit.
It's me, not you.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome.
It's hilarious, though, but I agree. I think there's certain times for people to be ready, and then I think there's certain times where people aren't ready. Mm-hmm. And I think people have to hit, and I don't consider necessarily rock bottom, but I think people have to hit that place of pain.
Yes, they do.
Before it becomes so painful that they have to make a change.
That's right. I agree. One of the things that I laugh about, and most of my clients will tell you, and I'll laugh because you mentioned I'm on the Real Housewives of Dallas. And so if you notice in one of my sessions, very first one on episode 2 this season, I make Stephanie cry. I am very good at that. It's one of my innate talents. But the reason why is I make my clients cry, usually on their first visit. And it's gotten to be very funny. But the reason is because I have this ability to hit the one heartstring that really is where the pain lies. And once they hit that and they really start to realize that's why they're really sitting there in that chair, that's when we really begin the work. If I can't hit that, then it won't end up being a good fit.
I totally understand that. What was the one thing that you really touched on in that episode?
I will tell you that it had to do with her talking about Brandy. Because one of the ways that I started working with her way back over a year ago now was when Brandy had a true argument with Stephanie. And it broke her heart. It's like having your sister say she never wants to talk to you again. And then having every family member out there be ganged up on against you. And it broke her heart to have that person that was there every single day in her life not be at that other end of that phone. And so what it created is a way for her to really learn to grieve that with that loss, but then how do I start to stand up and build myself up and be more empowered? And so that's how I actually started working with her. And so why did she cry? Because we got to the heart of what she really missed. What was it? It wasn't the phone calls. It wasn't the laughter. It wasn't the poop hat that you guys put on or whatever it was. It was that you missed that daily touchstone where somebody affirmed you. And so when we got to that, then we started being able to turn it around.
That's great stuff. Yeah, I agree with you on that, because it's very interesting when somebody loses a friend and they didn't die. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't realize that there's a grieving process that has to come into play. And it's funny how people want to gloss over that.
Yeah.
You know, they want to get right back into living, do whatever I have to do, as much retail therapy as possible, anything to, not even worry about this. But in reality, they never even dealt with what happened. So that's still waiting for them on the other side of that. And so any silence or any non-movement or not just being busy for busy's sake, all of a sudden that hits again.
That's right. And what they do is exactly what you just said. They stay super busy with all their time and fill up the space where the lack is. So if you think about it, every time if I talk to my best friend from noon to 2, there's a lack there. I may not know that, but my subconscious does. So what do? I fill that up with something. And it depends on what that is. It's overeating. It's going to the gym and maybe working out too hard. It's finding somebody else, that fulfills that need during those hours. Or I turn to other things like numbing myself with things that are actually hurtful to my body during those hours. And then I don't tell anybody about it because people would think I was weird that I'm missing my friend. The other thing that you just brought up that I think is something to really hit on is that not only do I go into lack with losing the friendship, I go into lack about the way I feel about myself. Because what happens is I want to look at the fact that she left me. She walked away from me. And I don't know why, so there must be something wrong with me. And then that's where we have to start as well.
That's good stuff. When I return, I'll be talking more with Lori about her work and how she got so knowledgeable and wise in her industry. Stay tuned, because Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back this time in 2 shakes.
I'm learning to fly. Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Joining me here live on Live Your True Life Perspectives, Lori Dixon. Lori is a coach. She really helps people get their lives together, organize their thoughts, and walk forward with purpose. Lori, so right before the break, we were talking about your work on Real Housewives of Dallas. When you were talking about that actual situation with losing a friend, not actually physically losing a friend, but losing that relationship, I'm sure you see that in a lot of clients. How do you work to reestablish that time that they're usually used to spending time with that friend or being on the phone with that friend? Because I think it gets customary over a period of time. When you've known somebody for years, you get into those routines, right? Whether you talk to them the first thing in the morning, or their text is the first thing, or you talk to them all lunch, or maybe you go to lunch with them every other day. How do you train yourself into a more positive habit at that time than, like you were talking about, alcohol, drugs, shopping, all those types of things?
Yeah, great question. It's probably why you have the radio show. Thank you. And you're on the other end of that mic. I will say one of the things that we have to look at is they have to start empowering self. And they have to start looking at that piece of gratitude for self first. And so when you think of someone going into loss, they're going into that lack, which is what we were talking about. So to get them to go the other direction, they have to look at abundance. They have to look at what they do have, not at what they don't have. Sometimes instead of going all the way from negative to all the way to positive in anything we're working on, we have to go to neutral. Because that's a really big leap to take people to suddenly think, oh, I'm amazing. I have all of this. It's a really hard thing because they don't believe that. They're just stating those words. And so in the middle of that, we have to get them to neutral. And so we want to talk about what are the things that you appreciate through your day. What are the things that you were able to accomplish today? Getting them to set an intention in the very beginning of the morning. So if they got a text from their best friend at 7 a.m. every day, then at 7 a.m., I want you to be setting an intention for what you're going to be doing today. Not just achieving, but doing. Something for self, something for others, and something around a situation. Something that's feel good for you. And that doesn't mean always shopping. Okay. It may be going to lunch with a different friend you haven't had a chance to spend time with. Taking and doing something different that you haven't tried before. But that's neutral, is setting intention. At the end of every day, I work with them on doing at least 5 things that they were grateful for. 5 things that even if it's, I made it through today. I did it. I was able to stay up. I didn't stay in bed this time. I didn't take the sleeping pills to make me stay in bed. Not saying that anyone that we know at all has done that. I'm using a hypothetical there. But at the bottom of that, you end up then using it. What's the one challenge or the one thing that I wanted to do differently today? And so they accept the challenge, which becomes the intention the next day. And we do that for at least 30 days, which keeps them in neutral phase. It's like pressing pause. Eventually, we then look at those 30 days to move them forwards. Because when you think about it, if I can sit and tread water and be able to look at the positives in my life, I don't sit there for long. I start moving forwards. And before they know it, they see how far they've actually come in that time frame. So
I like that. I also think a lot of times, too, you know, when we look at the negative or we look at somebody that left our lives or walked out, I think a lot of times we don't realize that there's a reason for a lot of this stuff. And in order to get to the next level in our life, or in order to make the connections we need to make, or to make the friendships we need to make, something had to leave. Something had to move out of place for other things to come into place. And I think often we don't realize that value. We see it as that we were left there out in the cold, when in reality, this is probably going to help us become stronger, happier people. And eventually, if the relationship was meant to be, it'll come back around. At that point, the other person has to ask themselves if they're willing to jump back in.
that's right. It's called boundaries.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about boundaries.
Boundaries!
Boundaries are so fun. You know, I've had some folks walk in literally that have no idea what a boundary is. They have no idea. I like it when you get a new client, and I'm joking, but not really. When you get a new client that literally they meet somebody they're working with, that person that they're working with becomes their boyfriend. The boyfriend ends up moving in. There's this whole combination of he happens to be the boss of the company, and you got all this stuff going on, and they go, well, I just don't know why this isn't working. I don't know why he thinks he can come into my office and grab my butt. I don't understand this. Well, not only do you work together, but y'all had an affair at the office. Now you're living together and you're working together. And now there's going to have to be a rocky pattern. There's got to be something rocky that comes right. This is a good screenplay right here, right? And then it all hits and they go, I don't know how it happened.
It's kind of like the car crash at the end when the car is completely out of control and nobody's paying attention. You know?
It's like, ree, ree. Here we go. We're veering from left to right at 120 miles an hour, and I'm wondering why this is not working.
And we're yelling, where's the road? Where's the road?
Where are the lights? I don't know where they're at. It's total darkness right now. I'm hurling through space.
Oh, my. Oh, yes.
Why are people not... Why is boundary such a weird term for a lot of people to understand? I think it's because we were born without boundaries. I think our parents didn't get it. I don't think mom or dad taught us what a boundary is, because I think most people, when it comes down to the fact, is they want to be loved by everybody. Everybody wants to be accepted and loved, so no matter what I have to do to get that acceptance, I'm going to go for it.
That's right. As well as our parents had their own issues with boundaries.
Oh, yeah.
And then our parents' had the issues with boundaries. You know, let's take it back here and talk about, generational. But I will say it depends on what went on in that environment. And so there are some homes that allowed their kids to make choices and suffer consequences. or looked at natural consequences, or allowed them, you've got two choices here. What are you going to do? How are you going to make that decision? It all went down to decision making. And so we look at each generation and how that's changed. We won't start on the generation right now because when you think about it, every one of the generations has been supported in a different way. Whether it's financially, whether it's living at home longer, whether it's expectations of that child in that home or that youth or that college kid, or you're 52 and you're still living in your mom's basement. It all depends on that boundary, but it has to do with decision making first. We've also created codependent relationships. And so we are always looking for that person that's going to create our happiness instead of finding it within. And that's a big difference.
Yeah, that is a big misnomer. You're right about that, Lori, that we look outside of ourselves for value. We look outside of ourselves for love. I don't remember how many conversations I've had in just the last 2 months where it's like they're coming from that perception of two halves make a whole.
Yes.
And I'm like, yeah, that's just not the way it is. And they think that this other person is going to be the other half. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, we're not trying to make one. I mean, there are two people here. We're trying to make two. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of environment, like you said. I think it's part of how people's parents thought. Mm-hmm. But I think when we look outside of ourselves all the time, we keep coming up short. So we feel like, well, if this person makes me happy or makes me laugh, then that's my other half. Mm-hmm. But what happens when that person leaves? Do they take your happiness with you?
That's right. Well, yes, they do, if that's what you believe.
Right.
I always laugh and say, I think it all started with the Jerry Maguire movie. Where they're in the elevator and they see the guy and the girl, and he signs to his girlfriend, "You complete me." Well, no, I don't think that's what that sign meant. And so we have to look at nobody completes us. We have to complete ourselves. That's what true empowerment is. But I will also say this, and I know you have both male and female listeners. But I do believe that women have a very, very different skewed perspective of that in many ways. And I think they carry so many different lenses of what each perspective of their life has to look like. And so I think there's a lot of confusion for women. And I used to work with both men and women, and a lot of the things I've done, it's always been co-ed. Even when I played softball, it was on a co-ed league, so I learned. But I will tell you that I chose to start working with so many women recently because I'm seeing the need so deep there that we need women to rise up and to start being whole, to be okay with things so that they can handle the things that are coming in life.
When we return, we'll be talking more about women and purpose and coaching. So stay tuned because Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. We'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Joining me on Live Your True Life Perspectives, Lori Dixon. Lori and I have been talking about women and purpose and how a lot of times the men and women's roads might be different. So going back to what you were talking about, Lori, do you find that a lot of times women's direction is a little different because, the whole concept of, well, I want to get married and I got to have these children, and maybe to some degree I think that that's my purpose, but that really isn't my purpose, but I get lost in that shuffle?
Mm-hmm. I do think that there are old stereotypes that are out there. I think that it depends on, again, we go back to quickly to environment, but it depends on what the expectations were that were placed on you early on by your own mom or the women in your family. And so if your mom or your grandmother or your aunts were all PhDs, there's going to be a very, very different perspective on you about what to achieve in life. If none of them were married and they all had girls in the family, there's a very, very different perspective that's placed on that. And so looking at that, it really comes from where we've been. Because when you look quickly in the rearview mirror, it's meant to educate us. It's meant to give us insight to go forward and to be able to plan and be intentional about that. So yes, I do think it's a piece of it. I also think it's because women believe that they can't have it all. And so they have to make a choice. And so I either have to go career, or I have to be a mom, or I have to be a great wife. And we have a difficult time being able to balance. You hear women talk all the time about balancing their life. Well, guess what? Life is never going to be completely in balance, because there's always going to be a different level of something going on or a need that's there. So it's learning, how do you value the balance and those pieces of your life?
Yeah, I've never really understood that. I just heard that yesterday, too, somebody in a conversation talking about balance, and that's not ever been something that's ever been in my mind, because I don't think you can ever balance anything. It doesn't make any sense. It's like saying, well, I give 50%, you got to give 50%, but you gave 49% last month, so, we got to really focus on this. You can't really qualify that. Why do you think, though, that women get so caught up in trying to figure out identity? Why aren't men on the other side of the equation going, well, I got to get that career, but I really want to start a family, but I got to be a good husband? And I'm sure there's a lot of men out there that have questions and trying to do their balancing, but why do you think there's such a difference in that?
I do believe it also is what we look at in media, that's placed in front of us every day, that we're meant to be able to do it all. And no one can do it all. And I think it's different than when a guy comes in and realizes he's going to have a career and that he focuses on that predominantly. And that women have a different perspective about what being a female and a woman really is. I also think, though, that we do a lot of it to ourselves, because we're always prejudging. We're always in a comparison, but that came very early. That was something that goes on. Also, men think logically. They think differently. Women think emotionally. And so we can train ourselves to go from that emotional connection to the cognitive, which is the best real way for us to function. Men learn to go from the knowledge and that cognitive and logical side to emotional if they're balanced themselves. That's where I think the balance lies, is learning to be able to have just as much cognitive and logical as we do emotional. And I think you would see a lot more balance in our lives if that's what was predominant.
I agree with you. I do think that a lot of times when you rule by the emotional thought process, you're not really thinking through things, and you're allowing things to get to you a lot more than you would normally. And you see that a lot. And you see people holding emotional grudges for decades, with their family. And it's like, why would you even bother doing that? Doesn't that take more time to do? How do you deal with that? Let's say you have a client comes into your office, and her mom haven't spoken. And there was a big fallout 10 years ago, and everybody's holding on to the grudges. I know that a lot of times people don't want to see it because they want to hold on steadfast to their side, and I think that it begins to define them. How do you work with a client like that?
First, I let them go through the entire episode, and we talk it through as if it happened today. And I want to hear every nitty-gritty detail, because I have one of my little talents is being able to listen to what you're also not saying and hear the emotional tie behind it and things that you repeat and repeat and repeat in something. And so what happens is I make those mental notes, and then I form questions later about, so what I hear you saying is blah, 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 blah. And we touch on some of those, and many times they will start switching the story. And so eventually what occurs is, well, so you're telling me what, your mom was severely abusive. And so, that's a very strong statement. I want you to tell me about that because, boy, that must have been very difficult to endure. And so we talk about that word abusive again until we get to the neutral perspective. And we say, so how is, we get to ask the question, so was that really abuse or was that her in fear of what was going on? Was that a fear thing she said or was that an abuse thing that she said? And many times they have that aha in the neutral space. And so we then are able to say, well, let's start looking at a positive way that she could have done that in communication. What would have been better? Do you think your mom knew that she should have said it differently? And so then you start looking at the forgiveness factor. You're right. My mom's mom said that to her. That's something I used to hear my grandma say. And so we then go into that deeper area that I call the deep dark cave, or down the rabbit hole until we start pulling that anchor up. Because usually it's something about self-worth. Usually it's something about an episode that happened early on that everything, again, was chained to. So we can't go down, all the way to the bottom until we actually deal with the episode that's right here in the front that they can't see through. It's on the dashboard.
Have you ever actually done a reunion in your office where you reunited people?
I have.
How was it?
Fabulous. Very tearful. I have lots of Kleenex. I'm known for giving out Kleenex packages. I just did an event this weekend that we had lots of people shedding a lot of tears. So I had Kleenex with flip-flops on them. So everybody would say, I need a flip-flop. So it was very funny and because it helped them not to feel bad about shedding tears of release. There's a difference. Shedding tears of grief or loss is different than shedding tears of release and joy. And so that's where we want to get them to. If you think of they begin here and they go there, I've done my work here. Drop the mic.
I like that.
So, yeah.
I like that. I like the flip-flops, too. That's cute. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize you have to let go of this emotional stuff, and we hold on to it in our bodies, in our muscles, in our back. A lot of times when people have extreme back pain, but they've done the MRIs, they've done all the scans, you're like, do you think it could be mental? Do you think you could be holding on to it emotionally, Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how we hold on to that stuff internally. I mean, you could hold on to it in your arm or your leg, and I had a client one time that literally had, before they came into me, had 10 back surgeries. Why a doctor would continue to do this is beyond me. However, it was mostly emotionally tied. 85% of it was emotionally tied.
Yeah. I will tell you so much of the time that I'm working with women that have health crisis. And when I first started my practice back here in Dallas, I was actually working with people that had chronic illness because myself, I have chronic illness. No one usually believes it. My doctor even can't believe it because I kept myself in remission for so many years now. And it's because I worked on the mental and emotional stuff. And so being able to take them where they are, in the pain where they are, and getting them to realize that, giving them some things that can help them from a dietary, exercise, sleep, reducing stress, all those normal aspects. But then getting them to start to see that there's actually an emotional connection to that. I do a lot of looking at body work and then tying affirmations, talked about affirmations earlier, back to the affirmation of where that lies in the body, because it is at the cellular level. It lies at the cellular, which is a lot deeper to work with.
I agree with that. The whole client, the whole patient, that's a big deal. A lot of people just want to work at that symptom with a Band-Aid,
Yep.
Let's get that Band-Aid off you and we'll keep going.
Exactly, as the person is bleeding with their arm hanging off.
I think it's a half-severed arm over there. I don't know if that Simpsons Band-Aid's going to help. I don't know. We'll find out, though. Let's try it out. It's been a blast having you on the radio, Lori. So tell me, how can somebody find you on the website, on the internet, and how can they get in touch with you?
I'm nowhere at all to be found. No,
Okay.
just
Smoke signals.
Just kidding.
Smoke signals
Just
only.
kidding. Subliminal. You can find me on my website at walkwithlori.com. I also have a Facebook page that you can reach me there. I do Messenger on there too. You can also find events that I'm doing and attend either an event or a workshop. I do some individual and private clients still. And I would love to be able to speak with you or if you've got an organization, please feel free to reach out. I'd love to come and do a group for you. I also write a blog that is on the website that I even have covered and gone in deeper. So every episode on the Housewives, I go in and relate it to something that's called relationship realness. So there's lots of topics on there that we've even covered a little bit today.
Awesome, Lori. Well, I look forward to having you back on the show sometime.
Would love it.
Awesome. And for everybody out there, you know how to get in touch with her, and walkwithlori.com is the web address. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
You could be my luck.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. That was a great show with Lori. I'm glad that she was able to come in studio today. You know, I think a lot of us have gone through a lot, and I think a lot of times we don't really take the time to really analyze and see all the things that we've come through, all the advancements we've made, all the contributions we've made to society, to our family, to our friends. And a lot of times we're really hard on ourselves. And if you are hard on yourself and you're dealing with that right now, that's something to really recognize. And I think because of the way our society is, because the way that we have a tendency of comparing ourselves to others, especially with social media, which is a big implication, but also how we were raised. You know, when we look up to the older folks who raised us, our parents, anybody in between, we learn a lot, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. And a lot of times we learn the things that we probably shouldn't be doing, but that's the way life is. And so we got to actually work through that and figure out why we chose that, why we've gone that direction, and how to make those changes in our life. I found it very interesting talking to Lori and having these conversations because, you know, we all process things differently, mentally, emotionally, physically. You know, when I talk to clients, when they first come into my office, I explain the fact that a lot of the stuff we're going through, you would just think would be just like in your mind, or perhaps you're having a certain emotion, but you can actually physically feel some of the things that you're going through. You can physically actually have pain, and it's a big deal because, you know, our thoughts become things. And so the things that we think about a lot, that we give a lot of power to, become things in our life. And so when we're thinking a lot about negative stuff, judging ourselves based on, negative comparisons, when we are going through tough times and judging ourselves negatively, you know, for example, I can't believe I'm in this type of relationship, or how am I surrounded by all these toxic people, or why can't I get out of this and create something better in my life. And I feel that I understand exactly if you're finding yourself there where you are, okay? That broken record can get very loud, and the stress and the anxiety can build up over a period of time, and you don't know what to deal with first, okay? And if you are dealing with a negative environment, if you are dealing with toxic people in your life, if you are dealing with even toxic family members, it's really hard to separate the issues in your life when you have this type of negative impact as well, impacting you on a daily basis. And so, you know, when I work with wonderful clients, I like to try to help find the negative components, the toxic components, the things that we can figure out, that we can identify, that we can understand. Because when things are toxic and we don't recognize it or realize it, those things can affect us more than anything. You know, being educated, understanding, being able to see through things that we might not have seen through before because we were raised around it for so long that we were raised to believe it's normal, but then realizing this isn't normal and understanding how to deal with it, well, it really helps us. You know, it's the same thing as getting a diagnosis of having back pain, for example, for years on end and having no idea what's going on, and you're in pain. And you finally go and get that MRI, and you find out that you have a problem, you know, with a cervical disc on, you know, on whatever, on 4 or 5, whatever. You have a problem with it, and you need to have surgery, and you need to have something done. When you finally realize that, it doesn't make it like, oh, wow, this is easy. I need to have surgery. This is great. But it makes you realize, okay, this is a real problem. I'm looking at the scan. This is a real issue. I can see it. I should be in pain because this type of thing causes pain. Now that I know that, now I can act accordingly and make decisions based on that. And I find that oftentimes in our life, we don't really realize where or what's coming from where. And I'll give you a good example from my own personal journey. And, you know, we're all in this together, you know, and we all need the knowledge base to understand what situation we're in. And I find that from my own personal journey, and for many of you out there listening right now, there might be a family member or a friend that you've had for a long time who might be a narcissist, who might have a high degree of narcissistic traits, maybe even possibly a borderline personality disorder, having many of those traits, really, and being able to understand what that means and the impact that that personality has on your life is golden. Because a lot of times when people don't realize that that even exists, we begin to question ourselves. We question our own direction. We question our own knowledge base. We might even question our own, reality. And when we're able to step back and say, okay, now I'm able to identify things in my life. I'm able to understand why this is happening. I'm able to identify it, understand, be able to kind of diagnose it in a way, and then understand and get to the point of why I'm feeling this way around this person. All of a sudden, the lights come on. There's no more huge tunnel that's completely dark, and you're kind of just walking haphazardly in it going, well, I hope I don't get hurt. I hope I don't fall. And a lot of times in life, we aren't given those tools that we need to understand, because other people around us, they didn't understand. They don't even know it exists. So how can they educate us on something that they don't even understand? And that's what's so important about seeking a life coach or a therapist, is because there are things that we don't understand. There are things that we don't see because we're too close. When we're too close to a situation, it's really hard to analyze it properly. It's very difficult to understand why we feel certain ways and why certain people might, bring the worst out in us. And that's something that I find highly effective, is to be able to understand all the people around you, the people you spend the most time with, all those factors, and then be able to understand where you are at that moment in time, the anxiety that you're feeling, the stress you're feeling, where it's coming, why it's coming from there, and work to alleviate that. Because life is tough enough when you don't have somebody in your corner to help you. And I find it very interesting, and the reason why I brought Lori on the show is that, I'm not in competition with anybody. And I find that a lot of times you find therapists and other people that do the same type of business, you find them in competition, and I just don't agree with that. I think we all have our special tools. We all have our special outlook, our specific perspective, our organic, original perspective that really meshes and gels with certain personalities better than others. And that's why I find it interesting, because I don't believe there's competition. I think there's enough for everybody to go around, no matter what you're doing in life. Because I think that when we see scarcity, our life becomes full of scarcity. We bring more of that to us, right? Whatever we see the world as, we bring to us. We bring it. Because, like I said earlier, our thoughts become things, and they actually become real things in our own reality. They become our reality. And so if you take something from this show today, taking the fact that what we believe we achieve, right? So no matter how positive that is or how negative that is, that will come to pass. And I've been on both sides of that coin. I can't talk to you and communicate with you without have struggled and been through it and gone through the tough times and been in that tunnel where there is no light and been in that dark tunnel where I have fallen down, I have tripped up, and then realize there is a better way. And that's what life is that you want to find someone that's obviously educated and knows what they're doing, but they had to have gone through it as well to understand the pitfalls. It's easy for somebody to tell you to leave that toxic relationship. It's easy for someone to tell you to leave your spouse, your girlfriend or boyfriend with BPD. Leave them, just go. But they don't really realize how hard it is. They don't realize that some of these relationships is like almost like a drug, an addiction. And so they quickly just tell you just to leave. If you know what's good for you, you'll leave. You know how hard that is just to leave? And when you go through that process and you try to do it on your own, sometimes that can be one of the most painful, scary processes. And when you end up going back into the relationship, not only do you go back, but you kind of go back and you go, man, I know I screwed up. Okay? I know I'm better than this, but I don't know how to break this cycle. I don't know how to get out. And that's why I do this show. That's why I've been on the radio for all these years, because I want to give you the knowledge base to make your life awesome. Okay? Because it matters to me that you are happy. It matters to me that you have unconditional love for yourself. It matters to me that you are also unconditionally loved. And it matters to me that you are mindful and creating abundance for yourself instead of scarcity. I again appreciate Lori for coming on the show. If you'd like to check out some of my recent work, go to ashleyburgess.com. Don't forget to listen to the latest podcast after they're on the radio, after they, go live on the radio on AM and FM. They become podcasts on Spreaker, 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 and iHeartRadio. Don't miss those because you can listen to them on your phone or in your car on your commute or at the gym working out and getting motivated at the same time. Stay tuned. I have a great show for you next. And Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. Well, you know what? I'll be back this time, you know it, in 3 shakes.